All right, well, it's 5:01 Pacific time. Let's go ahead and get started, and I'm sure a few people will still be streaming in from Facebook and such. Welcome, everybody. It is a pleasure to see you all again. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Pacific Symphony's Mixer, featuring an incredible conductor, Sarah Hicks, who will be joining us next week for Toy Story 4. Sarah, thank you so much for being a part of this, and welcome to our mixer. I'm Dr. Jacob Sustaita, the assistant conductor for Pacific Symphony, and let's dive in. Sarah, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you and everyone.
Of course. I mean, we are so excited about you joining the orchestra next week, Toy Story 4. I mean, so much to talk about. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of Toy Story 4, Disney, your incredible work with them and everything you do, for all of our patrons out there, tell us a little bit about, like, how did you get started in music? Was there something that happened when you were itty bitty and you just said, I want to go play an instrument? Or what happened?
What happened? It's a good question. I grew up in Hawaii. I was born in Japan. I grew up in Hawaii, and my parents were not musicians, but they're artistic. My mom's a classical Japanese dancer. My dad was an avid amateur musician. So I started out with piano lessons when I was 4 or 5, and tiger mom. So I practiced a lot and, got really good. And it was a talent, and I felt I could express myself really clearly through music. And so I wanted to pursue it, playing the piano as a career. I have super, super small hands. This is an octave. So I started having hand problems in my mid to late teens, and I had to quit for a while, and I was really depressed in my room, as teens get depressed a lot. But that sort of, my voice was taken away from me, and my dad said, you can still hold a stick. And I remembered when I was young watching Bernstein conduct Beethoven with the Vienna Phil, just as a really, really young kid, and just how I thought that's amazing that this magician can conjure up all this sound. And I thought, well, why can't I be the conjurer? And so that's where it started. I was 17 when I started conducting.
Wow.
Young, and yeah.
That's, I mean, incredible. Was there, I'm going into the musical nerd. Was there like a piece you were playing that started to cause the hand? Like, was it Rachmaninoff? We hear those, those pictures of his hand, and it's just like this gigantic thing. Were you playing something really like extensive with a big reach?
I was just playing a lot of big repertoire, Gershwin Concerto, Saint-Saëns Concerto, all the Rachmaninoff preludes, a lot of Chopin. I mean, Chopin didn't have a big hand, but wow, his stuff requires, a lot of stretch. So I wasn't physically suited to do it. So you sort of have to decide when to close that door and hope that another one opens. And that happened for me.
And you also pursued composition at a point, was that correct?
I did. I went to Harvard, and at that time there was no performance degree. So I had been composing since I was a kid. So I thought, all right, I'll pursue this. And it was good. It was interesting. I think it's important for a conductor to have a really deep knowledge of the compositional process, because that really helps you understand a score from the inside out. So it stood me good stead, and I composed some interesting works, but I realized that I was good, but I was not great. So not worth pursuing,
I read actually that in an article that I was doing some research for this mixer, and I thought that quote that you just said, it was good, but I realized I wasn't great. I can remember in my own life as a viola player when I had a similar thought, and that struck me when I read that a few days ago. I just thought, I cannot wait to meet you, because it takes someone really special to actually say something like that, a musician, an artist who would call out themselves like that. There's like a humility and a wisdom in that. And we are so lucky, because was that like another moment that kind of put you really securely into the world of conducting?
Yeah, in a way. I was doing a lot of extracurricular conducting at Harvard, and doing operas and musicals, and there were like 4 orchestras there. It was remarkable. So I had a chance to do the conducting as well, but it was a point where it was my major. I was a composition major, and just writing all this stuff and comparing it to what I was conducting. And I thought, no, this stuff is way better. I'm never going to get there. So it was a great exercise, but leave the greats to the greats and pursue other things. And conducting was always there. So that's what I pursued.
And when you were growing up, you said you saw Leonard Bernstein. I remember watching PBS, and they would do those great performance broadcasts, New York, Phil, Vienna, Berlin, the summer concerts. And like being awestruck, not only by the playing, but these incredible maestros. And one thing I do remember though, is I never saw a female conductor.
No.
Did you even think of that? Or were you just thinking, wow, that's a magician up there, like you said earlier? Was that even a part of your thinking?
It wasn't. I was lucky to grow up in Hawaii where people aren't defined as much in a way, like especially racially in terms of our backgrounds. I'm half Japanese, half white, and most people were like me. So we weren't predetermined by what we looked like or who we were, I think, as much as other communities or societies or parts of the country or the world are. So it didn't really occur to me that as a woman, I didn't like identify as I'm an Asian woman, but it's more like I'm a person who loves music and wants to try conducting. So in my mind, it wasn't until much later in my career when I started encountering resistance from, a lot of people, musicians, board members, that it really struck me that I was, frankly disadvantaged as a woman. But when I was starting out, everything was new and I just wanted to learn stuff and, conduct as much as possible and learn music and get in front of people. So it didn't matter that there were a few women to look up to at that point.
That's inspiring. I mean, I love to hear you say that. And I hope more people hear that it doesn't matter if you see it, if you want it, you go for it. And I have to say, I guess that's always been a part of like your DNA, because you also attended the Curtis Institute of Music, which is, the pinnacle or one of the pinnacle of, conservatories to study at. And not only did you go to Curtis, but you studied with the legendary conducting teacher, infamous conducting teacher, Otto Mueller. I mean, I've only heard stories, and usually they are scary stories. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like, not only being a student there, a conducting student there, but then also being a female conducting student? And did he have anything to say about that?
Well, I think I was only the 5th or 6th female conducting student he had, and this was in the late 90s. So, you make your judgment. I mean, he was like the 7-foot tall guy with this enormous head, and he was in his 70s at that point, spoke with a really heavy accent and scared the bejesus out of us, in the lab orchestra where we conducted the student conductors. He had no problem insulting us and telling us we're terrible. And, what are you doing? What is that arm? Are you a musician? So that was tough. And, this is a famous quote and I say it everywhere, but when I started at Curtis, he told me that women are weak and Asians are not expressive. And, that's always stuck with me. I think it was a test in a way to see how thick-skinned I could be. I don't think he meant it entirely, but that sentiment was there. So it was like a challenge. The gauntlet was put down, and it made me want to rise to that challenge to prove him wrong. He later told me, I started teaching at Curtis right after graduation. So I was teaching conducting to non-majors. So I would see him in the halls and in the corridors, and I had gotten engaged when I graduated. And he said, "Oh, that's too bad. You'll get married and never have a career." So, it's the sort of prevalent, very old school attitudes. And again, I don't think completely meaningful in the sense that there was a sense of jest, but still, to hear that as a student in your really formative musical years is it's challenging to say the least.
I imagine. I mean, did it get you down at all when you were told that by your teacher?
I think I was confused and angry that I had to encounter that. And you know, in the end, this man taught me how to analyze music in a way that I've not seen any other person teach it. And, you know, thanks to him, you can slap anything in front of me and I'll be like, yep, I can figure that out within an hour and, you know, conduct it to some degree of, you know, ease. And so I'm grateful for what I learned. I'm not grateful for the fact that it always felt like a unpleasant push and pull to prove him wrong about his basic attitudes about me. You know, very strong personality, very old school. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And you said something a little earlier, like part of it, I think, is to see if you have the gusto, the guts
Yeah.
to make it in one of the most challenging industries, and in one of the most challenging positions in that industry, to be a conductor. Few positions, period, and then in a very difficult artistic field. Sometimes I think we're thrown those tough comments or questions or just told things to see if we have what it takes to make it. And well, I think obviously you have proven him wrong.
Well, we're here, and it sounds like you've gone through something similar as well, you know, rising to challenges and
Yeah, I
being
think
told that you wouldn't succeed in some way or
yeah,
challenge. Yeah.
those moments when we're being trained, I think, as musicians, are lasting. They stick with us, and by making it through those, we realize for ourselves that I have what it takes to make it in a world where you might be blamed for everything wrong with a performance, or
Right.
you know, you have to have a certain type of personality and
Sure.
confidence, right? And I guess that's the conductor talking to the conductor.
Right, exactly. We know.
Now, like, you have had such an incredible career, and particularly you have become a specialist, I'm saying that, in this film concert performance experience. I mean, you go all over the world, not the country, but the world, doing these performances. I know you've had a partnership with Disney. Can you tell us a little bit about how you consulted with Disney and then just got into this film concert experience and become what you've become?
The live to film, you know, experience has obviously become incredibly popular with orchestras. And I was an early adopter. I think I did my first in like 2010. Before there was a lot of technical know-how into creating these products. So I think I did like Psycho, and there was like a little analog clock in the corner, and you just had to figure out where everything went by the clock. So I mean that was really low tech, and it began with that. Now it's incredibly highly produced and high tech. Um, so yeah, I was just an early adopter, and I think some people are good at multitasking and coordinating and taking in extra musical information. And yeah, it's just you have to have a larger vision. And I think, you know, some people have larger visions about Mahler. I had a larger vision about how to coordinate all this visual and audio information to create something musical that happens to be aligned precisely to a film. So, I mean, you have a knack for it. So I had a knack for it. So I pursued it. And as it became more and more popular, you know, not all conductors want to do that or develop that skill to a high degree. So I would say in the field now, most people have tried it once, or have some experience, but you know, it takes a lot to perfect that experience, to that skill. And I don't think most people want to bother to do that. You know, because it's not going to constitute most of your work. But when I switched over to non-classical or the pops world in 2008, that was part of my vision, was to bring those experiences to audiences as well. So it sort of fit into what my concept of what my future was. And that's why I pursued it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
film scores, period, have always been a favorite of audiences.
Mm-hmm.
This particular experience, I think, it is becoming more and more and more popular and desired. I remember going to see Jurassic Park when it was presented when I was in Texas with the Houston Symphony, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. I would love to go watch a movie and have a live orchestra play. Let's watch a clip of you explaining this process.
So I have a lot of information that I'm looking at. First of all, I have my musical score, which has all of the musical information about which cue it is. They're not called movements, they're cues. Also, I have these little circles are for punches, which are bright lights that I see. And these lines that you see are called streamers, which is a line that comes across the screen. And then I also have here my click track, which is in my ear. I'm the only person on click for this particular movie, and some movies require more people on click. So I have all that information that's written. That information correlates to what I see on screen. Here is the measure number, and here's the number of the beat it's clicking on. So if it's a 4/4 bar, I'll hear 4 clicks. If it's a 2/4 bar, I'll hear 2 clicks. So it's just like a incessantly in my right ear. So sometimes when I go to bed, I still hear it. So I am showing the orchestra what to do following this. So if you imagine that with any orchestra, if you give a downbeat, there is just a very slight delay for the sound, because that's just human reaction time. So to line that up to what I'm seeing and hearing in the click, I need to be ahead of what I'm seeing and hearing on the monitor so that the orchestra will actually line up to my streamers and punches into my click. So I always tell people it's like playing a demented video game, because you have to line up all these things. And on top of that, I have to react to what's going on in the orchestra. Within the confines of the click and where things have to happen, there's actually there's wiggle room for music that you want to create. But it's an interesting challenge to say, well, Yoda is falling here, so these things need to happen within the span of time. How do I make it musical and about me, but also make it line up? So it's a lot of information going on, and it really engages your entire brain. Putting together these films in this way, this is not how they're originally conceived, right? It's completely different. So there are wonderful companies who put these together and produce these, and that takes a lot of time and effort to make that all line up. So it's really this influx of technology and our ability to recreate these that allows audiences to see these films with live orchestra. It's not that we just kind of play the music with the film. There's a lot of production involved with a lot of people with a lot of expertise who do a really wonderful job. I like limits because I think you have to be more creative when you have limits, and that's fun for me. But also bringing this to an audience, because film music is often the first time that audiences are exposed to symphonic music. So that's familiar in their ear. So to hear it live really accentuates the fact that this is an orchestra and you're hearing these amazing sounds that you've heard in this movie, but now live with these real people. And to have that energy translate is really exciting for me. And I think it changes the film experience for the audience completely, because you see this film in a different way. It re-energizes our love for films and introduces us to this incredible medium that is all these people on stage called the orchestra.
Wow, I love that clip.
I was like, that's a pretty good explanation. Well done, Sarah.
I mean, I watched it, of course, earlier, but every time I see it, I'm thinking, okay, so you've got an earpiece, it's giving you information, you've got a monitor with multiple pieces of information, a movie, a streaming, a flash of this, and a score with not just a full orchestra score, but a streamer and dots and then information, and you have to be ahead of the game, and then you have to get the orchestra to play in time with what you hear, which means you have to be ahead slightly. I thought opera conducting was challenging. This sounds like a challenge for sure, but what was that experience like for you early on? Did you think, okay, I know you said the analog with the psycho, but as this process evolved, do all these extra components actually help?
Oh, absolutely. I think they're quite necessary, especially with the more complicated films. John Williams scores, sometimes it's a huge wash of glorious, majestic sound, and sometimes it's very specific to the film. So you do need to have a level of precision. I would say all of the animated, Pixar, Disney, those are even more challenging because the sound, the soundtrack is often really a character that is creating the mood of, the storm and Little Mermaid, or, it really is a part of the action even more. So you do need all that technical stuff. But I will say for me, I like it when my entire brain is so busy that it can't think about anything else. I actually find that really soothing. People are like, aren't you stressed? I'm like, no, it's great. My mind is just in the zone. So I actually really have always enjoyed it and don't get stressed out. Well, most of the time I don't get stressed out.
Yeah, and I like what you said too, that there's still room and capacity for an artistic experience. There's just a lot of things to line up, and I think I'm so glad that you mentioned that earlier, because I know some people sometimes think, oh, is it just like pressing play? Very much not. Would you say that?
No, I mean, we're not aiming to duplicate the exact soundtrack as you see it. We want you to hear it with that music, that group of musicians, that orchestra, and that hall on that day, and what it feels like, and what the energy is like, and what the phrase might be like within the larger scene. If there's, space to create music within a limited space, I think it's an interesting challenge. You have to be really aware and cognizant of where things go and then where it needs to be at a certain point. So it's a real it's a testament to musicians' flexibility and understanding of time as it flows, I think, to be able to do that. And to me, it's musical and exciting. So there are a lot of those moments.
Yeah, and for everybody who's joining us today, please feel free to put your questions in the question and answer box or in the chat box, and I'll be reading those, and we'll save a little bit of time at the end. But we have a comment, Sarah, from Kat. She says she's always been impressed with films and concerts, but is absolutely in awe now that she hears about everything that goes on to get this thing aligned. I mean, I'm thinking too, there's so much in a movie with music where if you get off, you'll cover the dialogue, or you'll be playing music from one scene and now we've moved on. I mean, you don't have to say if you don't want to, but has there ever been a near disaster in your time doing these types of concerts?
The only near disaster is, here's one, which was kind of scary. I was at Blossom with the Cleveland Orchestra, and we were doing Speaking Little Mermaid. So I'm on click, and all of a sudden, because they do it on radio, it's not plugged in. Something happened. Some radio wave interfered, and all of a sudden, like the click just blew up in my ear. It went like, so I had to pull it out frantically, because all of a sudden I'd gone deaf in my right ear, and then sort of figure out where the heck we were at that point. Fortunately, it always feels like, you probably had this experience on the podium, it feels like 5 minutes, and it was literally 5 seconds. So, you have that moment of panic where you're just like, I have no idea what's happening, because my ear is just gone. But we found each other.
And I mean, I can only imagine, with all these layers, that one small technological glitch could throw, all of a sudden the earpiece stops working or buzzes out in your ear. Nobody knows that, and you have to keep going.
You have to keep going, because the movie doesn't stop. I will cite one more thing that happened. These Conductor videos that you saw on my screen are highly produced. However, they're multi-tracked, so sometimes the click and the streamers and the punches, if something happens internally on the computer that the technician is running it on, sometimes we call it click drift, and you realize that it's off by almost a beat sometimes. So at that point, you rely on your memory of what that section was, and you send a violin player back to the video guy to be like, it's drifting, and to reset it in a period where there's no music. So, stuff happens.
Wow.
There's technical issues that happen, apart from, the brass players all of a sudden starting the wrong cue, and you're like, no. So they get the hand. So
yeah, right. That second lesson in conducting, the palm stop.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
We've got a question comment. And Teddy, I see your question we'll get to at the end, but someone said, could you please repeat that quote, at least paraphrase? You said, I like limits, and you have to be more creative with these limits. And we have an anonymous attendee who asked, could you say what you said about that a little bit more, or again?
Sure. I mean, if you tell someone, be creative, What does that really mean? There's no parameters, and I find it really hard to be creative without parameters. If you say something has to happen within the 7.5 minutes involving this and this, it becomes a wonderful challenge. And it's within those parameters that you're able to think, for me at least, to think in the most creative way. It's kind of like problem solving. And I think, people find problem solving as if there is a singular direction. Problem solving, there's actually a billion ways to get to that answer, and those are individual. So to me, it's examining and experiencing all those billions of ways and choosing one path for that moment, understanding that there's so many other paths. And to be able to hold that in your mind and understand that, to me, that's really creative. And that's really fun for me to have, those limits and to explore all these ways to reach that solution.
I imagine also, because you have this incredible opportunity of doing these film concert experiences with so many different orchestras and all around the globe, that you hear The Little Mermaid or Toy Story. Yes, it's the same music, but it's never the same, is it?
No. It's never the same between concerts. If you do it more than once, it's just a different mood, or yeah, it's different every night, and every orchestra is different. And that's exciting too. Some orchestras have brilliant brass players, and some orchestras are more focused on string sound. So it depends where you are and what the focus is. Yeah, so and they're different personalities as well. All orchestras have different personalities. So
Oh, yeah.
that's part of the matrix as well.
Yeah. Is there a film that is just the one that you love to conduct, or one or two of them that they resonates with you?
I would have to say Star Wars: A New Hope, which is episode 4, the first one that came out in the 70s, just because it was so, it was formative to a lot of us of a certain age. We shall not name that age. But, when you have this memory as a kid of just being overwhelmed by this cinematic, but also musical and just all sensory experience, to be the one that's creating that is just, it's so exciting. It doesn't matter how many times I do it. And I've done it a bunch of times. So, and that's really rewarding. Also, I think with any film, to hear audience responses to this music that I love and often the musicians love, and to generate this excitement and get people excited about seeing an orchestra on stage and these marvelous sounds. Yeah, it's really exciting and rewarding for me to see and feel that delight, I think.
Yeah, I know my brother is probably jumping up and down. Isaac, I know you are, because Star Wars, the original, A New Hope, was, and still to this day is, one of those, movies and memories. I don't quite remember it, of course, but I wasn't yet on Earth. But the movie, the soundtrack, the score is
iconic, just iconic. Yeah.
What a great, absolutely a masterpiece. So I look forward to that day. I hope I get to do that someday soon. With this live orchestra film, what are some of the other challenges that our audiences may not be aware of that you're going through when you're conducting these?
Well, people, if you really think of movie music, I'll go back to John Williams. I mean, some of it is Mahler-esque. I mean, it's tremendous, huge orchestras. It's really, really difficult music. The Harry Potter stuff, like the first Harry Potter, is it Hedwig's theme? I mean, the string writing is astonishingly difficult. So these are, these are bravura performances, and musicians have to be quite extraordinary to be able to play it at all, but then, stay with me to line it up to film. So I think that's something that audiences don't think of. And usually with films, we get very few rehearsals. So we're doing it in half the time of a normal concert. So yeah, it's a really compressed time frame for really, really difficult music. So I like for people to be aware of that.
Yeah, that's something I think that we audiences sometimes just aren't aware of. What you have to get done in this amount of time is remarkable in of itself, on top of what you've explained to us, these incredible technical things that you're looking at in the score and watching on. So you're watching a monitor, you're looking at the score, you're also being with an orchestra that's usually very large. There's a film going on and an audience behind you. Talk about immersive. I mean,
it is immersive. Yep, exactly.
And like you said, especially the scores of John Williams, some of those parts are so demanding and full of such intense and complex music making. I imagine studying these scores takes quite a while. I mean, I'll be your assistant next week for Toy Story 4. I picked up my scores and I kid you not, it's a volume of pages. How long does it take you when you're given a new one of these to go from beginning to end?
Wow. I mean, I would say if I'm learning it really well, at least 20 hours.
Wow.
You know, just because, I mean, I don't think that all conductors would do that. You could probably do it in 10 hours, but I understand that I'm probably going to do these films over and over and over. So it really behooves me to do a deeper dive than other conductors might. Because you're likely to, if you work for an orchestra, see a film come through, but you're probably never going to see it again. You know, I'm probably going to see the same film 5 or 6 times. So the first time I encounter it, I want it really studied well enough so that when it comes back, I don't have to go through the process again, because that would just be time prohibitive. So, yeah.
So do you, if someone said, we need you to do this film to music score coming up, you're going to be the first one, would the first thing you do be go watch the movie or go to the score?
I like to watch the movie because I want to understand. If I haven't seen it, I've seen most of these films, but to sort of understand what the narrative arc is and where the music really fits in and how the music becomes integrated or becomes a character in that film. And then I go to the score and there's like a whole system. All conductors have a system of studying and marking. Marking is very important when we're talking about film scores because you have a lot of things to look at. So you want to know exactly where in the score you're looking at when. So I go through that process before I watch the film with the music, and then I do that a lot. And then I go back to the score to figure out what parts will be challenging to the orchestra, technically, either from a playing perspective or from a lining up perspective. So I have a list of things and I'm aware of that. So it's a multi-part process, and everyone has their own system, and I've been doing this for over a decade. So I have a very specific system and it works for me, but it takes a long time.
Yeah, and I imagine, and someone asked me in a private question here, are you able to practice with all these technological additions like the earpiece and the monitor or not?
So I have a conductor video that's generated and produced just for my monitor and screen that I use during performance. That is given to me when I'm learning the music. So I'm seeing what I'm going to see when I'm working. So I do have, it would be impossible to do without that. And there's a click as well. And some people use clicks and some don't. I kind of like it. So all the technical information is there. So I get to practice it. I'll see it. But you don't know how it's going to feel till you get in front of an orchestra, and then every orchestra is different and their reaction time is different. So all bets are off. Yeah.
Sometimes I know musicians even wonder, what is this thing about the timing? Without us going too far down that rabbit hole, can you, like, for our audience members who are on this mixer with us, what is it and why is it a little different from group to group? Because you've mentioned it a few times, and those of, I'm a conductor with you, I totally understand, but what would you say, how would you explain to everybody this idea that, dare I say, there's a delay? I think maybe better timing is maybe a better way to think about it, but without getting too technical, could you tell us a little bit about this challenge and mostly what it is and why is it different from group to group?
Sure. So, just very practically speaking, if you give a gesture, it's just human nature and the law of like light and physics that it's going to take you an instant to react to that. Add to that the neuronic buzz that goes to your fingers to be able to create that. So you're just layering tiny delay upon tiny delay. That, and if you think of with an orchestra, you have people creating sound by drawing a bow across a string, which takes a little time for it to resonate, versus someone who's blowing into a mouthpiece on a 27-foot long tube. That's going to take a different amount of time to engage, and then someone blowing into two pieces of wood, or rapidly vibrating between your lips. Like, everyone creates sound differently. So in an orchestra, it gets used to everyone kind of waiting a little bit, because there's just a sweet spot for when they know that they can start sound together. So no matter how insistent you are, they're all going to be finding the sweet spot. It's just human nature. So, and then some orchestras just want to relax into sound, and so there's a big delay. Some orchestras are super on top of the beat. LA tends to be that way because a lot of them do session work. So they're on top of the beat, I think, much more than a lot of other orchestras. So yeah, it really depends, but it's something to contend with.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the, I guess you could say, challenges or fun parts of being a conductor. When you travel and work with so many orchestras, they, like you said earlier, they all have their own personality, and that makes it exciting, whether you're doing Little Mermaid for the 15th time or Beethoven Symphony No. 5 for the 500th time.
Exactly.
It's always different, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you're always learning the mechanics and the personality and the emotional connection with a group of players in front of you. And you have worked with the best orchestras in the country. Can you tell us a little bit about, sorry, we have two more questions before I move on that I want to get to. Kat asked, how nervous were you the first time you conducted a film to score in front of a live audience?
Gosh. So I will confess that I don't get really nervous when I perform, and there's a specific reason. I don't feel like it's not about me, right? I'm sort of the vessel through which everything needs to come, both from the musicians outward and also taking the audience's energy and spreading it to the musicians. So when you take away yourself from performance, it's hard to get nervous because you're only nervous for yourself. But if I'm like, it's not about me at all, I have a function of creating the right energy, then it becomes not nerve-wracking. It just becomes a process that we're all in together. So I guess I'm not nervous. Films are a little nerve-wracking because you can't, as you said before, you can't stop when it starts going. So you feel very beholden to lining things up and not letting things get out of sync. But because you want to create that really legitimate experience for the audience, and you want them to enjoy it in the way that both the filmmaker and the soundtrack composer intended. So I do feel that responsibility, which is different from conducting Beethoven, because yes, you do feel responsible to Beethoven, but there's a lot more leeway in that. So it's a different attitude. And yeah, I think I would say more focused than anxious. And once the film starts, it's just like all bets are, no, you're done. You can't really think about anything else for the next 2.5 hours.
Yeah, and that's probably the most exciting part, when the moment that downbeat happens, here we are.
Yeah.
And we have Amira asked, do you know one of these film to movie experiences from memory?
No, never. Yeah,
I mean,
there's too much. As you said, yeah, they're enormous. Like the Batman score is literally like this. So Star Trek has a really big score. Yeah, there's just no way I can memorize that.
But I'm sure you've done some of these films many times with many groups.
Sure.
I imagine with a Batman or something, it gets more, you're more at ease with it the more you do it, right? I mean,
yeah, you know where the strange turns are and where it's going to feel awkward and where the orchestra is going to feel behind, or which lick is going to be hard for the woodwind section. So, that's going to be funky, or where your brain is moving more slowly than the click track is. You find the problem spot. So you're more aware of those, definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering those questions. And everybody, these questions are incredible. So keep them coming. But before I was mentioning your work with all these types of orchestras, and I was going to ask you if you could share with us a little bit about your time with the Minnesota Orchestra. And I know you still have a close relationship with them, but just to share how important that was for you and what you got out of that experience with such a great, amazing orchestra.
Yeah, that's an astonishing ensemble. One of the greatest in the country. I started as an associate conductor there back in 2006. Doc Stavronson was the Pops conductor. Yeah, speaking of, and he was retiring, and I had reached the point in my career was, I was just starting out actually, but I thought, I don't want to be a traditional conductor. I want to do other things, to work on projects, to crossover performances with artists of other genres, to work with film. So I took over his position essentially, and I've been in that position since. We call it principal conductor of Live at Orchestra Hall, because we don't call things pops anymore, at least in that, in my world. So yeah, it's been a long-term relationship. I think it's important to, when you create ties with people within an organization, you can take more risks musically and trust them more. So to have that relationship is really remarkable. And this past year during the pandemic, they started a series of live broadcasts, and I hosted the broadcast. So I took on even a different role with that orchestra and sort of got more in depth from that direction. So yeah, it's a really long-term, it's like a good long-term relationship. We haven't, the 7-year itch hasn't happened yet, even though I've been there for like 15 years. So.
Well, I mean, that is one of the best orchestras for sure. Who was the music director when you started there?
It was Osmo Venska. He came in 2003, not long before I did. Yeah, and he's been there since, although I think his last season is this upcoming season.
Yeah, I think so. And wow, what they've done with him, incredible. Let's watch just a little bit of the end of the third movement of Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 6 with you and the incredible Minnesota Orchestra.
Aren't they great?
They are great, and it is so nice to see you in action doing something like that. And you still work with them pretty regularly, you said, right?
I do. I still have that position, so I'm there. Yeah, I would say 10 to 12 times a year, almost once a month. So yeah, it's a really regular relationship.
Wow, that's great, and not too far from. You're based in San Francisco, so
it's a 3-hour flight. It's in the middle of the country, so it's totally doable.
That's awesome. We've got another clip coming up, but tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Danish National Symphony Orchestra. You've done so much with them, and talk about another world-class orchestra. How did this relationship get started, and what is it like, or what are the differences working with an orchestra like Minnesota and then going overseas, Europe, and working with Danish National Symphony?
I have a wonderful agent, Tim Fox, who used to be with Columbia Artists, which is no longer. That's a whole other story. But the managements have incredible relationships with orchestras all over the world. That's how I was hooked up with the DNSO. Those films that are on YouTube that everyone's seen, I think one of the concerts we did, Murder in the Symphony, there is a combined almost 200 million views over all of the videos. So, this is, that's not Murder by the, it's the other one, the Ennio Morricone one. Anyway, a lot of views, millions and millions. I love working with them. They are the radio orchestra, so their venue is set up for broadcast, which is why those videos are incredibly beautifully produced. There's cameras all over on booms. There's a really sophisticated lighting system and sound system created for TV broadcasts, which is why those films are so beautiful. And I love working with them. You know, the Danes speak English really well, so communication is really easy. It's a wonderful chilled orchestra. They do a lot of different repertoire, so they're super comfortable with film work of all genres. And yeah, it's fun to work with a group of people who are really expert at that and are used to the whole TV produced thing, and are just along with you on this wonderful ride. So it's a slightly different attitude from a lot of American orchestras.
Yeah, it is. The playing is incredible, and we're going to hear a clip in a minute. But do you, as a conductor, when you're working in the States, and then when you go to Europe, particularly, is there something you remind yourself, like, okay, now I'm in Europe, don't do this, or yes, do this?
Gosh, not really. I don't think it matters country wise. It's just that there's some orchestras that are more formal than others, and I'm a very informal person. So I try to gauge my level of engagement and in the language that I use, you know, given what orchestra it is, whether it's in the States or, you know, especially Asia is a little bit different. And well, I speak Japanese, so working with the Japanese orchestra is okay. But yeah, all orchestras are different. You know, being sensitive to cultural differences to me is really important.
Yeah, and I mean, I imagine a conductor who travels as much as you do is always picking up on the unspoken elements of a culture of an orchestra, and you know how they do things and how they approach even rehearsals. And sometimes the relationship just kind of clicks. It seems like you and the Danish National Symphony Orchestra, like you really click.
Yeah, we get along.
Yeah, it's nice when artists are kind of like kindred spirits, you know, it's like we make music in the same way, let's keep doing this.
Exactly.
You have done a number of projects with them, correct?
I've done 3 big concerts, 2 of which are available on YouTube, multiple nights, of course, and they're huge projects, long-term projects, and they do a lot of them. So yeah, it's nice to be called back to do that kind of thing. And I hope to be back to do it again. You know, it's been a year and a half since I've been overseas, and it's been rough not to see my overseas friends. So I'm looking forward to being back.
I imagine. Well, before we move on, because we're running out of time, let's watch a little bit of The Godfather with the Danish National Symphony Orchestra. I mean, we had to hear The Godfather.
I know, right? Oh, it's such great music.
That particular concert looks incredible. So no film, film score, but I see you had a choir. What a great graphic, some very unique instruments. Yes. Was that a fun project to do?
Oh, so much fun. Working with, there was a soprano soloist, there was a trumpet player in the balcony, you know, there was a little bit of everything. It's so much fun to do those concerts.
And I can imagine pretty much anywhere you perform that in the States, there's going to be a lot of Godfather fans there. Was it received well by the musicians and the audience members over there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And everyone loves that film music. And that's such an experience to be, that hall is in the round. So people are all around the orchestra, and it's just extraordinary. It's a great experience to be in that hall. So people love it. Of course, orchestra members love it. It's wonderful music.
It sounded so good, and it looked theatrical and just like a real experience. I love concerts like that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, that's fantastic. We have just a little bit of time left. I mean, our time is almost up. We have one question from Teddy that came in earlier, and Teddy's asking about Frank Zappa, which I thought was really interesting. And he says, what do you appreciate about Frank Zappa? And does Frank Zappa's music tie in with your practice as a conductor?
You might see the poster back there. We produced a concert. This was at the Prague Proms, maybe 4 years ago, incorporating Zappa's orchestral music and some arrangements of his non-orchestral stuff. I mean, the orchestral music is unbelievably complex and technically challenging, but to me, it's just it exemplifies like a brain that works on so many different levels, and it's thinking about so many different sounds and so many different elements. I don't know if his work informs me as a conductor, but I really respect him as an extraordinary musician. And, you know, what a challenge to actually write orchestral music. That takes like courage and knowledge. And yeah, that was a great, great concert.
Yeah, I saw that poster, and when Teddy's question came up, I was like, excellent observation.
Yeah.
Teddy, thank you for that. And
Yeah.
Sarah, I had no idea that there was orchestral music available.
Yes, recorded by, oh, look it up. I can't remember it. It was a while ago, but a lot of orchestral music. Yeah.
I will.
Mhm.
We have an interesting question that came in privately to me. In the time and culture that we are living in the United States, what would you say? What are your thoughts to women and to Asian Americans dealing with everything that they're dealing with, not just in the arts, but the challenges that are coming to so many types of people, the divisiveness? You have been and continue to be such a success and inspiration. What would you say to young people who are put into boxes that see something for themselves? Because you have been and you continue to be an inspiration. You never let any of those things stop you.
That's a big question.
I know.
I mean, I guess in its most basic component, it comes down to agency and authenticity. And, you know, we all have agency, and we might be put into boxes, but we have the ability to both prove people wrong and to ignore the constraints that are put around us and to live by example. And just authenticity, you know, it's become sort of one of those words that's been tossed around. You know, if you can authentically find whatever it is that you are and that's important to you, you will be able to pursue it without being disturbed by external noise. But to find that is really important, because when you find that, you realize that you don't care as much that these constraints or attitudes are put around you. I mean, that's easier said than done. And that's more of a philosophical take on it. From a practical point, I mean, things are changing so much, and there's so many women, for instance, on the podium these days, all over everywhere, with major orchestras. That's changing. You know, I've seen more Latina conductors, Black conductors, Asian conductors certainly have been around forever. I think it's becoming normalized. So, you know, back in my generation, 20 years ago when I started, there was a lot of glass ceiling and a lot of ceilings of other types to burst through. And right now, I think with awareness and the shift that's taken, especially because of, you know, of this year of the pandemic, we've all had a chance to re-examine, and a lot of stuff is cracked open, especially in this country. And to ride that wave, and don't be afraid to be at the forefront, and do you, you know, authentically find what is important to you, and don't let people put limitations. And I don't know, I was brought up, you know, I wanted to prove people wrong because I believed in myself and what I do. And I say to everyone, start with that. You know, it sounds simple, but just start with that.
Usually simple is the answer. Sometimes complex to get to.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
But in the end, I love what you said. If you just speak to who you are and do your best to let that outside noise be outside.
Yeah.
Sometimes I know it's hard when it's on a megaphone, constantly bombarding you, but you can always seek the truth inside, within. If you can, shut the doors and the windows to that outside noise.
Yeah, no, create your own world for yourself, because that's all we can do as people, is to look at the world and find our own way of looking at it, right? And so find your way that integrates you and supports you.
I'd love that. We have just minutes left, and I want to play just a small game. I call it the Desert Island game. it's where you have to pick one of the two choices that I give you. So don't take too long. Just say
Okay.
what's there, okay? We'll start
Okay.
easy.
Okay.
Beethoven or Mozart?
Mozart.
Verdi, Wagner.
Verdi.
Rachmaninoff piano concertos, Beethoven piano concertos.
That's a hard one. Rachmaninoff.
I love doing it with artist friends because my goal is always to stump them. Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll take it into the conducting world or
Okay.
love of major works.
Mhm.
Mahler 2, Beethoven 9.
Mahler too.
Stravinsky or Ravel?
Stravinsky.
Debussy or Ravel?
Debussy.
West Side Story or Candide?
West Side Story.
Rite of Spring or Petrushka?
Petrushka.
Okay.
Mhm.
Marriage of Figaro or Traviata?
Oh, Figaro.
Verdi or Puccini?
Puccini.
Bach or Handel?
Bach.
Okay, last one. Copland or Bernstein?
Oh, Bernstein.
All right.
That's a tough one. So
That was a tough one.
Yeah.
I'm glad I got to stump you a little bit. Well, we're almost out of time. Alexi's going to put into the chat a link for everybody to get tickets to Toy Story 4 next week, August 21st. Don't miss it. We've got our incredible guest conductor, Sarah Hicks, coming to lead the Pacific Symphony in Toy Story 4. I promise, folks, you don't want to miss this experience. It's an incredible movie. The music is so beautiful and moving, and you get to meet and see Sarah Hicks live with the Pacific Symphony. So that will be in the chat box. We'll have a link to that. Of course, it's on our website, pacificsymphony.org. And don't forget that next week we have a panel with Pacific Symphony all about education. I'll be leading it with some very special guests. Sarah, thank you again for your time. It's 6 o'clock. We are out of time. Any final words for us?
Come to the concert. Believe in music. Believe in music.
Absolutely. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Sarah, it was such a pleasure and an honor to talk with you. Thank you for sharing yourself and your experiences with us. I look forward to working with you next week. And everybody, have a great rest of your evening. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.